Some men come home to gratitude. I come home to instinct, and instinct is the only reason my granddaughter is alive today. I'm 64 years old. Before I retired, I spent 31 years as a claims investigator for a major insurance company, which is a polite way of saying I spent 31 years listening to people lie to me and getting paid to notice. You learn things doing that job for 3 decades. You learn that guilty people over-explain. You learn that people telling the truth get the details wrong in small human ways, and people telling a lie get the details right in ways that feel rehearsed. You learn to watch hands more than faces, because faces can be trained and hands usually can't. I tell you this not to brag, sweetheart, because that's what I'd call you if you were sitting across from me, sweetheart, or son, or friend, depending on who you are. But because none of what happened to my family that October would make sense, unless you understood that I was built, by profession and by nature, to notice when something is wrong before anyone says a word. I blinked, and I told myself I was wrong. I would spend the next 6 hours proving myself right. My name doesn't matter for this story, but you can call me Walt, if you need something to call me. I live outside Council Bluffs, Iowa, in a house my late wife Marion and I bought in 1994. The kind of 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch that you don't see built anymore because nobody has the patience for porches these days. Marion passed 6 years ago, cancer, quick and cruel, the way it sometimes is, and for 2 years after that, I lived alone in a house too big for one old man and a dog. Then my son Bradley moved back in with his daughter, Josie. Bradley is 39. He's a good man, maybe too trusting, which I say with love and not criticism, because trust was never my strong suit and it cost me things too, just different things. His marriage to Josie's mother ended when Josie was 4. Not ugly, just tired. The way some marriages end, not with a bang, but with 2 people quietly running out of reasons to keep trying. Josie's mother moved to Denver for work and calls on Sundays and birthdays, and that arrangement, as sad as it sounds, worked fine for years. Bradley took a job as a regional sales director for an agricultural equipment company 2 years ago, the kind of job that pays well, specifically because it demands you travel. 16, sometimes 18 days a month, driving or flying to dealerships and farm expos across 4 states. When he told me about the promotion, I remember him saying, "Dad, I can't do this and raise Josie alone. I need help." And I said what any father would say. I said, "Then move in with me. I've got room, and Lord knows I could use the company." That was 18 months ago. Josie was 7 then. She's 9 now. A skinny, serious kid with her mother's dark hair and her father's habit of squinting one eye when she's concentrating hard on something. She likes drawing horses she's never seen in person, and a video game about building islands. And she has a stuffed rabbit named Colonel Fluff that has survived 2 washing machine incidents and 1 dog-related emergency. For a year, this arrangement worked beautifully. I was around during the day, as retired men have nothing but time, and I'd get Josie off the bus, help with homework, make dinner. Bradley traveled, came home exhausted most Fridays, and we all muddled through the way families do. It wasn't perfect. Nothing with a missing mother and a widowed grandfather in the picture is perfect, but it was good. Then, 14 months ago, Bradley met Renata. I want to be fair to Renata, because fairness matters to me, and because I know how these stories get told, as if every step-parent is a villain waiting to happen, and that's not true, and it's not fair to the good ones. I've met wonderful stepmothers in my life. Marion's own sister raised 2 stepchildren who adore her to this day. So when I tell you what happened, I need you to understand. I did not go looking for a reason to distrust Renata. If anything, I went out of my way not to. She was 34, worked as an event coordinator for a hotel chain in Omaha, and she was, by every outward measure, put together. Attractive in a polished way, always matching, always composed, the kind of woman who irons things other people don't iron. She laughed easily around Bradley. She brought Josie a Colonel Fluff-sized cowboy hat the second week they met, which I'll admit charmed me too. They married 8 months ago in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Omaha. Renata moved into the house. And because Bradley's travel schedule didn't change, and because Renata's hotel job allowed remote work 3 days a week, it made sense on paper, It made complete sense for Renata to take over the bulk of Josie's daily care, with me stepping back to a supporting role. I want to tell you exactly when the feeling started, because that's the honest way to tell this. It wasn't dramatic. It was small. It was a Tuesday in September, about 6 weeks before everything came apart, and I'd stopped by the house in the afternoon to drop off a ladder Bradley had borrowed. Josie was at the kitchen table doing homework, and I noticed she flinched, actually flinched, shoulders up around her ears when Renata came into the kitchen behind her a little too fast. It was nothing. Kids flinch. But I'd spent 3 decades reading rooms, and something about the way Josie's eyes tracked Renata across that kitchen, quick and careful, the way you watch whether you don't trust, stuck with me longer than it should have. I mentioned it to Bradley that weekend, gently, the way you have to mention things like this to a man who is already exhausted and doesn't need his father second-guessing his new marriage. He said, "Dad, Josie's had a hard couple years. New stepmom, mom in another state, dad gone half the month. She's cautious with everyone right now. Give it time." He wasn't wrong. And I didn't have anything besides a feeling. And feelings aren't evidence. I learned that the hard way in my career, chasing hunches that turned into nothing. So I let it go. Mostly. Over the following weeks, small things accumulated the way sediment does, one grain at a time, invisible until suddenly you're standing on solid ground that used to be water. Josie stopped asking me to help with her drawings after school, something we'd done together for a year. When I asked why, she just shrugged and said Renata liked to help her now. Her grades, which had been solid, started slipping. A note from her teacher, Mrs. Okafor, mentioned Josie seemed distracted and tired in class. Renata explained it as a growth spurt, messing with her sleep, and that explanation made sense. So I accepted it, the way you accept explanations when you don't yet have a reason not to. Then there was the matter of the visits. Renata had, very reasonably, suggested that since she was managing Josie's routine most days, it might be less confusing for Josie if I scaled back my after-school involvement, at least on the days Renata worked from home. "Too many cooks," she said, smiling. And Bradley agreed it made sense. And I agreed too, because it did make sense, and because I did not want to be the meddling grandfather who couldn't let go. Looking back now, I understand what that reasonable suggestion actually accomplished. It reduced the number of witnesses in that house from 2 adults to 1. The week everything changed started on a Sunday night, when Bradley left for a 9-day stretch covering 3 farm equipment expos across Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, the longest single trip of his new job so far. I remember hugging him at the door and saying, only half joking, "Call your daughter every night, not just when it's convenient." He laughed and said he would, and he did try, though as the week went on, those calls got shorter, because Renata explained. When I asked, Josie had been extra tired and going to bed early. By the 5th day of Bradley's trip, I hadn't seen Josie in person in 3 days, which had never happened before in 18 months. I called the house Thursday afternoon, and Renata answered, cheerful as always, and told me Josie had a stomach bug and was resting, and that she didn't want me catching it, given my age, and there it was again. That perfectly reasonable sentence that happened to keep me out of the house. I want to be honest with you about something. Some part of me, the part that had spent 3 decades trusting careful instinct, was screaming by Thursday night. And another part of me, the part that didn't want to be the paranoid old widower who couldn't mind his own business, who couldn't let his son's new marriage breathe, that part, kept talking me down. Friday morning, that argument ended, because Mrs. Okafor called me directly. She explained that Josie had missed 2 days of school that week for illness, which was fine. Kids get sick, except Mrs. Okafor had also noticed, during a video call session the district ran for absent students to keep up with reading assignments, that Josie looked her word off, glassy, slow to respond, slurring slightly on a few words, which Mrs. Okafor initially chalked up to a bad connection until it kept happening. She said she wasn't trying to alarm me, but as a mandatory reporter, she was required to mention any concern, however small, and she trusted that as Josie's grandfather, I'd want to know. I did not tell Renata I was coming. I got in my truck within 10 minutes of hanging up the phone. I arrived at the house a little after 11 in the morning. Renata's car was in the driveway. I let myself in with my own key, my house, after all, though it had stopped fully feeling that way for months. And the front hallway was silent, in a way that houses with 9-year-olds in them are almost never silent. I found Josie at the bottom of the staircase, half sitting, half slumped, against the newel post. Colonel Fluff still clutched in one arm, her eyes open but unfocused, tracking me slowly, the way you track something when your whole body has slowed down with you. She was breathing. I want to say that clearly, because in these situations that's the first thing that matters. She was breathing, but shallow. And when I said her name, Josie, sweetheart, look at me. It took nearly 4 full seconds for her eyes to find mine and hold there. And when they did, there was almost nothing behind them. No recognition, no fear, nothing. I have investigated fraud claims involving forged signatures, staged accidents, and men who broke their own legs for insurance money. I have never in my life felt my chest go as cold as it did, looking at my granddaughter's empty eyes on that staircase. Renata came around the corner from the kitchen a moment later, dish towel in hand, and I will describe her exact reaction because it matters. She did not gasp. She did not run to Josie. She stood in the doorway for a beat, one full beat too long, before she said, in a tone closer to mild irritation than alarm, "Oh, she's just having one of her episodes. She does this sometimes when she's overtired." I was about to put her down for a nap. An episode. A 9-year-old girl slumped and unresponsive at the bottom of a staircase, and the word chosen was episode, the same word you'd use for a kid who won't stop crying about a lost toy. I did not raise my voice. 31 years of interviews taught me that the moment you raise your voice, people either shut down or start performing, and I needed neither. I said, as calmly as I could manage while my hands were shaking, "Renata, I'm calling an ambulance." She said that wasn't necessary. She said it would scare Josie, that it had happened before and always passed on its own, that Bradley would be upset about the expense and the fuss over nothing. She reached for my phone, actually reached for it. Not aggressively, but with the easy confidence of someone used to redirecting situations back onto the track she wanted. I stepped back and dialed anyway. The paramedics arrived within 9 minutes. 2 of them, a young man named Cole and an older woman named Priya. Names I remember because I asked, because names matter to me, because you should always know the names of the people trying to save your family. Priya knelt beside Josie immediately, checking pupils, checking pulse, asking Josie questions in a gentle, practiced voice, getting only slow, mumbled half-answers in response. Then Priya asked Renata a standard question: had Josie taken any medication that day? Any at all? Even something over the counter? And Renata said no, nothing. Josie hadn't taken anything. I watched Priya's face when she said that, and I watched Cole's face too, and something passed between the 2 paramedics, quick and wordless, the kind of look professionals give each other when a story doesn't match what's in front of them. Priya asked, very evenly, whether there was any chance Josie could have gotten into a medicine cabinet on her own. Renata's answer came a half-second too fast, and it came with a detail nobody had asked for. She said, "No, absolutely not." Josie knew better, though she added, almost as an afterthought, the kind of afterthought that isn't really an afterthought at all. Josie had gotten into cabinets before. She's done it a couple times. It's a whole thing with her. I had lived in that house 18 months. I had never once heard about Josie getting into a medicine cabinet. Not once. Not from Bradley. Not from a teacher. Not from Josie herself. Renata was building a history in real time, out loud, for an audience of 2 paramedics and 1 very alert grandfather, and she didn't yet realize how badly it was landing. Cole asked to see the medicine cabinets in the house. Renata hesitated 1 more beat too long before saying, "Of course, this way," and led them upstairs. I followed. I was not invited, and I did not ask permission. The primary bathroom cabinet was orderly, unremarkable vitamins, aspirin, a half-used bottle of children's allergy medicine capped tight. But in the primary bedroom, on Renata's side of the bathroom vanity, tucked behind a makeup bag, Priya found a small, unmarked pill organizer, the kind with days of the week printed on it, containing several loose white tablets that did not match any prescription bottle visible in the room. Priya bagged it, professional and expressionless, and said it would need to go with them to the hospital for identification. Renata's composure, which had held remarkably steady through everything else, cracked slightly there, not into panic, but into a brittle, overly casual explanation about the pills being old allergy medicine samples she'd meant to throw away. Priya said nothing. She didn't need to. Her job was Josie, not cross-examination, and she moved us all back downstairs to load Josie into the ambulance. I rode with my granddaughter. Renata rode in her own car behind us, and I noticed, because noticing is what I do, that in the 11 minutes it took to get to Mercy Regional Hospital, Renata did not once try to call Bradley. I called him myself from the ambulance, my hands still not quite steady, and told him as plainly as I could that Josie was in an ambulance, that she was breathing and stable but unresponsive, and that he needed to get on a plane. He was in Kansas City. He was on standby for the next flight home within the hour, and driving the remaining 4 hours if the flight fell through. I have never heard my son's voice break the way it broke on that call. At the hospital, the emergency physician, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Halverson, ran the tests you'd expect: blood work, a toxicology screen, and within 90 minutes had an answer that confirmed everything my chest had already known on that staircase. Josie's system showed elevated levels of a sedating antihistamine, far beyond what would occur from a single accidental dose, along with trace amounts of a second sedative typically found in adult sleep aids. Dr. Halverson's exact words to me, once Josie was stable and resting, were careful and clinical, but unmistakable. This isn't consistent with a child getting into a cabinet once. This looks like a pattern. Renata, when this news was delivered in the small consultation room, went very quiet, very still, and then very defensive, in that order, which I noted, because guilty stillness and innocent shock don't look the same, not to someone who spent 31 years learning the difference. She said that toxicology must be picking up something from an old prescription, that children's medicine metabolizes strangely, that she wanted a second opinion, that this was all being blown out of proportion by an overprotective family that had never fully accepted her. That last part landed the way she wanted it to land, I think a little truth wrapped around a bigger lie, because it is true that I had never fully warmed to her, and she knew it, and she used it, right there in that hospital room, trying to reframe herself as the misunderstood outsider, and me as the suspicious old man who'd been looking for a reason to push her out since day one. It might have worked, too, on someone less stubborn than me, or on Bradley alone, exhausted and desperate to believe his marriage wasn't built on a lie. But it didn't work on Dr. Halverson, who had already, quietly and correctly, done what any mandatory reporter is required to do the moment a child's toxicology screen looks like this. By the time Bradley's flight landed, and he arrived at the hospital at 9 that evening, wild-eyed and gray with fear, a caseworker from Child Protective Services was already in the building, along with a uniformed officer from the Council Bluffs Police Department, a young, steady woman named Officer Reyes. Bradley went straight to Josie's room first. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. Because whatever confusion or denial came later, in that moment my son did the only thing that mattered, which was to sit at his daughter's bedside and hold her hand while she slept off whatever had been put into her system. It was afterward, in the hallway, that Officer Reyes approached us both. She was direct without being cold, which I respected. She said, "Sir, can I talk to you for a second?" To Bradley, not to me, and walked him a few steps away, and I watched my son's face move through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like the floor dropping out from under him, all in about 90 seconds. The investigation, once it started properly, moved faster than these things usually do, because the evidence was, frankly, not subtle once people started looking. The pill organizer from the vanity contained a mixture consistent with what was found in Josie's blood work. A search of Renata's phone, conducted with a warrant 3 days later, turned up a search history that included queries about how much children's allergy medicine to sleep, and, more damning, a text exchange with a friend from 10 days earlier, in which Renata had written, almost casually, that she was so touched out from solo parenting Josie during Bradley's trips, and that she'd found a trick to get some peace in the afternoons. A trick. That's the word she used for drugging a 9-year-old girl, so she wouldn't have to parent her. Officer Reyes later told us, once charges were filed, that in interviews, Renata had eventually admitted, after initially denying everything, to giving Josie doubled or tripled doses of over-the-counter allergy medicine on afternoons when she felt overwhelmed, sometimes mixed with a small amount of her own sleep aid, just enough to get a few quiet hours. She characterized it, even in her confession, as harmless, as something mothers throughout history had probably done, as an act of desperation rather than harm. Josie's actual medical picture told a different story. Dr. Halverson explained to us, gently but plainly, that repeated sedation at those doses, in a child that size, carried real risk respiratory depression, the kind that can, in the wrong combination, or the wrong day, simply stop a small body's breathing altogether. Josie had not been harmed once, based on the pattern Dr. Halverson's team identified from residual markers, and Josie's own hazy, frightened recollections, once she was lucid enough to talk. This had likely been happening, in smaller doses, for close to 2 months. 2 months of my granddaughter being quietly sedated into silence on the afternoons. Her father was hundreds of miles away trying to provide for her, and the flinching I saw in September wasn't a shy kid warming up to a new stepmother. It was a child's body learning to brace for something her mind hadn't yet found words for. Renata was arrested 11 days after that Friday, and I want to tell you it happened somewhere quiet and private, but it did not, and I won't pretend I was sorry about that. She had, by then, moved out of the house at Bradley's insistence and was staying with her sister, going about her days as though awaiting a formality rather than a reckoning. Officer Reyes and a detective located her at lunch, at a restaurant called the Copper Kettle on Broadway in Council Bluffs, sitting at a window table with 2 friends, a glass of white wine in front of her, laughing at something on someone's phone. The handcuffs went on in full view of that window table, the 2 friends, the surrounding tables, and the Friday lunch crowd. I was not there to see it happen, but Officer Reyes described it to us afterward, and I confess, I asked her to describe it twice. Renata was charged with felony child endangerment and child neglect, resulting in bodily harm. Given the pattern established by the phone evidence and her own admissions, the district attorney's office pursued the charges aggressively rather than allowing a plea down to something lesser. 8 months later, she accepted a plea agreement rather than face trial 5 years, with parole eligibility after a portion of that served, along with a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with Josie and mandatory completion of a parenting and substance-related counseling program as a condition of any future parole. Bradley's marriage to her was dissolved before the criminal case even concluded, on grounds that, under the circumstances, no judge in Iowa was inclined to slow down. I think often about how close this came to going differently. If Mrs. Okafor hadn't been the kind of teacher who notices a slur in a child's speech on a laggy video call and takes it seriously enough to make an uncomfortable phone call. If Bradley's flight had been delayed another day, and I hadn't trusted my own instinct enough to drive to that house without calling first. If I had let the reasonable-sounding explanations keep working on me the way they'd been working on me for 2 months, because each one, alone, really was reasonable. Kids get overtired. Kids get stomach bugs. New marriages need room to breathe. That's the thing nobody tells you about situations like this. The lie rarely announces itself. It comes wrapped in a dozen small, plausible sentences, each one easy to accept on its own. And it's only when you step back and look at the whole pattern, the flinching, the reduced visits, the too fast explanations, the word episode, for a child slumped on a staircase, that you see the shape of what was actually happening. Josie is 11 now, 2 years out from that October. She's in 5th grade, back to drawing horses she's never seen, though these days she draws them running rather than standing still, which her school counselor tells us is worth noting in a good way. She still sleeps with Colonel Fluff, threadbare as he is. She still, on occasion, watches me a little too carefully when I move too fast in a kitchen. And I have learned, the way you learn these things slowly, to move a little slower around her, to announce myself before I round a corner, to let trust rebuild itself at whatever pace it needs. Bradley cut his travel schedule by half, took a regional demotion he didn't have to take, and has never once mentioned regretting it. He dates cautiously now, if at all, and when I asked him once, gently, whether he worried he'd never trust his own judgment about a person again, he said something I think about often. He said, "Dad, I don't think the lesson is that I can't trust my judgment. I think the lesson is that I need to trust yours too, even when it's inconvenient. As for me, I still notice things. I don't think that ever goes away. 31 years of habit doesn't retire just because you do." Some evenings, I sit on that wraparound porch Marion and I bought 30 years ago, and Josie sits beside me with her sketchbook, and I watch her draw, and I think about how the whole difference between the story I'm telling you now and a very different story I might have had to tell came down to one Friday morning, one uneasy feeling I almost talked myself out of, and one decision to trust it instead. I pulled the blanket up around her that first night home from the hospital, the television playing some nature documentary neither of us was really watching, sea otters floating on their backs somewhere off a coast neither of us had ever seen, and I remember thinking, watching her finally fall into something like peaceful sleep, that I would rather be the paranoid old man 100 times over than be one day too slow, one explanation too trusting, ever again.